Welcome to the Throttle Up Leadership Podcast. Our theme for 2025 is the future of work. Meaning is the new money. In a world shaped by rapid innovation and constant change, the pursuit of purpose and impact has never been more important. I'm Dr. John Dentico, your host, bringing over 30 years of experience in leadership, strategic thinking, and purpose-driven innovation. Here, we tackle the pressing challenges of our time, from the rise of artificial intelligence to the growing need for meaning in the workplace. Together, we'll uncover how leaders can ethically integrate AI to enhance decision-making and keep humanity at the heart of their organizations. Remember, amidst all the technological advancements, in the end, it's always about the people. This podcast is your resource for actionable tools, thought-provoking discussions, and inspiring stories. It's time to go beyond leadership development and focus on leadership impact, creating workplaces where people thrive, innovation flourishes, and meaning truly becomes the new currency. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Now, let's throttle up and dive into today's episode. Hello again, and welcome to the Throttle Up Leadership Podcast. I am your host, Dr. John Dentico. With me today is Dr. Amber Johnson. Amber is a communications expert and leadership consultant based in Chicago. She's working to help people be better leaders, partners, and parents by improving their communication skills and especially the questions they ask. Amber is the author of the Substack newsletter, Better Than Fine, and I am truly pleased as punch to have her here with me today. Hello, Amber. How are you?
Hey, John. Good to be with you.
Good to be with you. Amber, let's start off by asking you a little bit of a personal question, and that is, tell me a little bit about yourself. Where did you grow up, and what in your mind were some of the fundamental influences in your life?
Yeah, I love that question. Thank you. I grew up in central Illinois in a tiny little town called Modesto, population 250. We have one stop sign. We've got a stoplight that's about 45 minutes away, and that's where the grocery store is too. Super small rural community. And then I went to college and moved to Chicago and joined the Peace Corps. And so I've had an unusual path where I've seen so much of the world and so much of the United States from various perspectives. And I think the absorbing all of that has really impacted my leadership because it's given me a skill of trying to step in and look from a different perspective, to understand that communities operate differently with different sets of values, different perspectives and priorities. And the more that you can ground your leadership or your communication in the current context and meet people's needs, it's really influential. And one of the biggest influences in my life, I think, is my grandma, who has lived in her own small town for 92 of her 94 years. She spent 2 years with my grandpa on an Army base and the rest of the time in this same tiny town that's even smaller than where I grew up. But she loved the world, and she bought us a set of encyclopedias so that we could read about the world. And she would take us to try exotic food like tamales and lobster, and she'd made sure we rode a train, and she gave me a spirit of adventure that's influenced me too.
Great. Did she live in the same house pretty much for all those years?
Yes, she and my grandpa built a house when she was about 20 years old, and she lives in it still.
Wow. She's still with us.
She's still with us. Yeah.
Fabulous.
In fact, the next meeting on my calendar is to give her a call.
Great. Yeah, I lost my mom about 10 years ago, and she lived to the age of 93. She battled all the way there. It wasn't an easy fight in the last few years. And I will tell you that elder care taught me more about perseverance than anything I have ever learned in my life. And I, too, have a wonderful appreciation for the world, having been a naval officer and traveled through the Mediterranean and all down Southeast Asia. But that's time for another conversation. Let me ask you this question. Amber, tell me about the kinds of services you offer to clients. What is it that you do to help people live a more meaningful and purposeful life?
That's a great question. I have a PhD in leadership, and so much of my daily work is helping organizations, usually privately owned organizations, build leadership programming, leadership development programs that are really specific for their people. And then I
Okay.
coach their leaders as well. And I also do some change management and some culture and communication work. But I think what is central to my approach is this idea that leadership is communication, and that we have to work on our ability to be strong communicators if we ever want to be effective leaders. And so that's really at the heart of what I do. And I think communication is about connection. No doubt your phone is as busy as mine. The statistics are that we pick up our phones at least 50 times a day. And so much of that is communication. It's maybe information sharing, but it's not real connection. And so my mission in life is really to help people unlock lives of connection and meaningful contribution by improving their communications, and especially the questions that they ask.
I'm very curious because I have a doctorate in leadership as well, doctorate in leadership studies. Where did you get yours, if I may?
Benedictine University, the Center for Values-Driven Leadership there.
Oh, wonderful. I got mine at the University of San Diego. You may have heard of this guy.
Program.
His name was Joe Rost, who wrote Leadership for the 21st Century, was my mentor, and gave me, when I got into the program, obviously having the naval experience, I thought I had a really good fix on what leadership was. And Joe taught us to look at it in a much more robust, more grander way of leadership. So we may get into a little bit of that. In fact, let's do that right now.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this question. If I asked you to give me your definition of leadership, I know you connected it to connection, but if I have asked you to give me your definition or perspective of leadership, what would you say?
Yeah, I borrow Peter Northhouse's. Peter Northouse is a professor emeritus at Western, and he writes that leadership is a process. It's not a position. Leadership is a process whereby one individual influences other individuals toward a common goal. And I think the important things are there that it's a process, not a position, that it's a process of influence. So we have to think about what our acts of influence are, and that we are moving people towards a common goal, not to Amber's goal, not to John's goal, not to the president's goal, but to the goal that we have created together and own together.
Ah, you're singing my music. Let me tell you right now, that is great. Yeah, my perspective is, my definition starts out with the word leadership is an influence relationship, and that engenders safety, trust, and commitment among leaders and their collaborators or partners. I got rid of the term followers. Among leaders and their collaborators and partners who intend real change, big change, that reflects their mutual purposes. So again, it's a mutuality of purpose, a mutuality of direction, of focus, and it's not about position.
Yeah, not
It's
at all.
not-
You can have leadership being most powerful from people who have never had a direct report in their life.
Absolutely. And I like to say that my model of leadership that I developed over 30 years ago has one central premise. And the central premise is contribution. In other words, I make no judgments about people in the room. I say, here's the problem. Here's the issue. Anybody want to help me? Anybody want to jump in here? And I'm not talking about just this word of participation bothers me. I'm looking for involvement. I want you to be involved in the outcome. I want you to find meaning from the things that you do. And I have often, and I teach leadership as a process as well. So we're singing from the same sheet of music. And that is, you have no idea how great that is to hear. It really is wonderful because, and let me, forgive me, I'm on my
ahead.
soapbox.
Yeah.
90%, maybe more, of the leadership training that is done, I refer to as leader development. Okay? Leader development. It's good. It's okay. The question in my mind is, can a person convert the knowledge and the information they've been given into practice? I put a line in the sand between leader development and leadership practice and action.
Interesting.
So in other words, oh yeah, you've been to all this training. Yeah, you got all these books. You saw all these tapes. Now let me see what you can do with it. And that's to me is really important. And that's where I live. In my simulation work, in my strategic thinking, the processes, it's all about let's get together and do something with the information. Any reflection on that?
I was just thinking it aligns so well with the Center for Creative Leadership's 70-20-10 model, which says that it's a kind of a model of adult learning. And it says that as adults, we should learn about 10% from formal training, the workshop you went to, the book you read, the class you took, 20% from dialogue and discussion with other people, and 70% from trying to apply it and make sense of it and figure it out. And I love that. It's a model I use in building my leadership programs, that I try to have people in the active application, even if it has to be in a sort of artificial in the classroom space. But I don't want to lecture the whole time, because I don't think we learn best from that. We learn best from testing an idea and seeing what feels right and adapting. And it's that active adaptation that really is leadership as well, because there's no playbook for much of what we're asked to do.
I absolutely agree. And now, today, as we sit here, the residue of COVID, which has really inspired people to say, is this all there is? In a sense, is there more meaning in life? Number one. Number two, the overlay now of the greatest technological achievement probably in the history of humankind, artificial intelligence, and its movement and the rapid change, the rapid development of it, and hopefully the ethical use of it, the ethical things like explainable AI and transparency on how AI is doing business, how it does business. And the third one, which I think is really coming to the fore, and whether you like this person or not, SpaceX is teaching us how to rapidly prototype. And I think that's the key that's going to be a key in the future, is how fast can you take an idea, put it into use, do something with it, and create the next advancement, if you will. So this whole idea of artificial intelligence, the aftermath of COVID, people searching for meaning, and rapid prototyping is really, I think, where the future of the ability of leadership to cope with these changes. Distributed, take AI, for example, distributed networks. Distributed networks. I can remember several years ago when the internet was really coming on, people had said, oh my God, now the people who work for bosses know more than their bosses. Now with AI, it's almost inconceivable that how much that information is going to be distributed. I'd love to get any reflections you have maybe on what I've just said.
Yeah, I think my focus is more on interpersonal communication and the leadership through that. And so I don't think I'm the expert on all of this. But another factor I would add to this is the incredible rise of our connectedness. We've had texting and social media for a few decades now, but the amount of time we spend online, just the sheer volume of hours we spend connected to other people, but without the ability to see them as people. And we see them as just digits and letters on the screen. And I think that really changes the way we communicate. And it has some positive impacts. We can be more aware of what life is like for others. We can find our community sometimes easier. We can pursue our passions and work in niche spaces that would have never have had access to. And we can make technological advances so much faster. And I think there is a cost in our experience of humanity. And I think that's where my work intersects with this topic.
Interesting. I had a coach by the name of Ed Temple on from MCC, qualified coach from Canada, and he said something that really has stuck with me. And he said, 75 to 80% of the things that we do today, the redundant things we do, will probably be handled by AI. He said, which makes the 20% of what we are, of our humanity, even more important. And I thought that was right on the money. So it's an amazing time to live in right now. And I will tell you, as one leadership person to another, I'll be frank. I've waited 30 years for this moment. I've waited 30 years. People say, yeah, you must be crazy. No, because this idea of leadership as an influence relationship, this distributed leadership network perspective, if you will, is on the table now, full and open. To think that we're going to go back to the hierarchical models, I don't think that's going to happen. No. Too many individuals have too much influence now, or a lot of influence, to actually move things from one place to another, in a manner of speaking. It's going to be a very chaotic time, but I think a time of great opportunity as well.
Absolutely.
Let me ask you this. I understand that you are a fan of haiku. See, I read things you send me. I read things that you send me. Do you have a favorite haiku poem? And would you care to share that?
I have one poem. I am not a poetry person. I have a child who is, but I am not. But I have one poem in my life that I have memorized because I find its truth to be so essential. And it's not one that I wrote. It's written by a guy named Michael Bungay Steiner, who is an Australian leadership coach. He wrote the book, The Coaching Habit, which is a great book. And here is the haiku, which, of course, just to remind your listeners, is the 5-7-5 syllable pattern. And his haiku is, talk less and ask more. Your advice is not as good as you think it is. And that's a full poem and a full period at the end of that sentence, because I just agree with that so much. And it's partly because questions are my thing. But I think we come into conversation so often with our own agenda, we listen to reload, and out of a polite sense of turn taking, rather than actual authentic curiosity. We ask questions that we either want to confirm our own way of thinking and assemble our allies, or we ask benign questions like, how are you? And we get a scripted response. And so I love that reminder that poem offers to talk less and to ask more. And when you feel the impulse to give advice, to come in, particularly in a work context, to come in with a solution and to your direct reports to tell them what the answer is, does it zip your lips, as your mom used to tell you? Ask a question, listen more, because probably your advice is not as good as you think it is. And I don't know how many times you've been in a conversation with a friend and you're sharing some sort of challenge and they immediately launched into, have you tried? And 9 times out of 10, yes, I've tried that. And the next 4 things you're going to suggest, because these are all the things that a reasonable person would try first. And the situation is more complex. And the asking more questions lets us get to that layer of complexity. And it's rarely in advice giving and more often in dialogue that we find the potential next step. Often not an answer, but a next step. And so talk less and ask more. Your advice isn't as good as you think it is.
Wonderful. And that's the point. There's a difference between a conversation and dialogue. Yeah. And I think we have to engage each other more in dialogue. The idea that our meanings, our perspectives can change based on new information received, as opposed to I'm planting my flag and that's it. I have a friend of mine who asks questions to bait you into a debate. And I say, I don't want to debate you. I said, you have to, no, he's got to, in a sense, he's got to be able to assert his perspective. And this is a one-way conversation here, and I'm not going down that road. I absolutely agree with you. And also, I wanted to ask you this. The manner in which you ask the question or ask questions is vitally important in terms of eliciting, if you will, a response that you're looking for, as opposed to shutting a person down. Why would you do that? Is a difference.
It's a question, but not a good one. Yeah.
That's right. That's a question. Like, why did you do that? No. More, tell me what you were thinking when you made that call. And because as soon as you do that, you clam people up. They're not going to tell you anything anymore. So
Yeah.
any reflections on that?
I always say engage emotions and experience. So have a little preamble to your question that engages emotions and experience. So let's say you've got a direct report who had to make a decision, a split-second decision, and it is not the choice you would have made, and your impulsive reaction is, what were you thinking? Which is, again, is a question, not the right question to ask. But you know that this direct report is regularly a very good critical thinker. You know that they aren't impulsive or reactive. You trust their experience. It was also a high pressure day at work, and so there were some other factors. And so you can name that up front. Hey, I want to talk more about this situation. I know it was a really long day at work, and I have seen how good you are at making decisions, but I'm missing something in this one. Can you help me connect the dots between what was going on and the decision that was made? And that little bit of framing, that engaging of emotions and experience, acknowledges that the person you're talking to is someone who has your respect, someone who is a whole person and very capable. And even though I may not be clear on why you made this choice, there is, I am certain, a reason for it. And it may be different, and you may have weighed the choices and made a different choice than I would, but I trust that it was made rationally. And that very simple act of gently engaging emotions and experiences often helps defeat the defensiveness that might otherwise be present. And then I like phrases, you use this one, tell me more. I sometimes say, connect the dots, help me make sense of this. Phrases like that, some of them are not even questions. Tell me more is a statement rather than a question, but it is a sincere and authentic request.
Yeah, one of my favorite phrases is help me understand.
Yeah.
Help me understand where you're coming from. Help me understand I'm not seeing this. To be that open, to be vulnerable and say, hey, you know what? I'm working it. But I just don't see it. The synapse in the brain that's supposed to tell me what you're saying is not working today. So you got to help me through this. You know that, and then that puts the pressure on me. I'm the one that's not getting it. And it makes it less challenging, if you will, to another person. And it gives them the opportunity to open up and be there in that sense as well. And I think that's so important. I think people don't understand how to do that. I think they've been taught. Go ahead.
To say, and then because it's a dialogue, as you said earlier, they're going to offer you your explanation. And then how you react to that explanation is going to have so much influence over your next opportunity for dialogue with this person. So let's say you still completely disagree with the decision. If you say that was a boneheaded move, that's going to eliminate all future conversation going forward. They're never going to feel like they can be honest with you. But if you say, okay, I get the steps you took. There are some other things I would have also considered, and you walk them through your priorities. And then you say, if all of that information had been available to you, if you'd been able to process that in the moment, would it have pointed towards a different decision? And you engage them in this conversation, and it becomes a teachable moment, not a scold, but just a moment where we can learn together and where we can understand each other's priorities and how we weigh them in making tough choices.
Yeah, I have just published my 79th podcast. Okay. And I'm on my way. I'll make 100 here in the next few months. And I tell people all the time, I've learned more from my podcast guests than probably the people who are listening to my podcast. I like to think that I've learned so much because people have been very forthcoming, number one. And number two is I'm asking questions that gives them the stage. You're the star here, not me. And but I've learned it's changed much of my perspective. It's given me, for example, it's given me my theme for 2025, which is the future of work. Meaning is the new money. Okay, is the new currency. And I would have never learned that had I not been able to do that. I want to take this conversation in a little bit different direction. I want to ask you, are you familiar, because we're talking about communication now, I'm going to get a little bit more general here. Are you familiar with Bowman and Deal's reframing organizations? No?
I haven't. Okay. No.
Okay. Bowman and Deal say that there are 4 frames for communication. The human resource frame, the symbolic frame, the political frame, and the rational frame. And I've always equated that with communications in the sense that how you frame the question or how someone or an organization frames the communication to the employees will fall either in one or hopefully several of those frames. So I just thought I'd mention that because it's always been such an influential book with me. Anyway, it's a
it's been
great
on
book.
my list to read. And as you were saying that, I don't know if you've ever read any of the novelist Frederick Bachman. He wrote the Beartown series, incredible series. And he has this one line in one of his books that says, parenting is like having a too small blanket, and you're constantly trying to keep all of everybody's arms and legs tucked under this blanket. And just when you think you've got everybody under this too small blanket, somebody kicks a foot out. And I often talk in coaching with leaders about that experience. It is impossible to keep all the things in balance. But when I hear you describe the frames of organizations, it is so hard to keep all of those things in balance at any one time, to keep them all under that too small blanket. And that's why communications is such a challenge, because what the need you have may be very different than the need the person in the cubicle next to you is. And we have to keep us all under this too small blanket.
Or when someone communicates using the political frame and it makes no rational sense whatsoever. That's the one. That's the real rub. Many times, organizations are making. Well, they may be saying a political statement more than anything, but rationally, everybody goes, Why are we selling that building? We doing that doesn't make any sense. So, and I like to think of them like the Karate Kid. Wax on, wax off, wax on, wax on, wax on, wax. So because the frames are always shifting. That's the idea, that the frames are always moving. And you have to see how you can interpret what the real communication is when, for example, from a company to a set of employees.
Yeah.
I want to ask you this question. I think every day people dread conversations that may result in conflict. I think people naturally shy away from conflict, treating it as something inherently bad. How would you advise someone to prepare for a serious conversation at work or elsewhere?
That is such a great question. And you know that old saying that the right time to plant a tree is 20 years ago and the next best time is today? So the right way to prepare for conflict conversations is 3 weeks ago or 3 months ago, in building the relationship with the person and getting used to giving small feedback so that you're in a better position to receive and to give. You have the muscle built to build harder feedback, to have built up the positive relationships so that you've earned the right to speak into a difficult conflict situation with someone. So the right time to start is months in the past. And when the urgent need is now, there are things we can do to prepare. And I want to come back to what we've already talked about, this idea of thinking about the emotions and the experiences that are present and the expectations people might be having, and to never go into those conversations without authentically considering what the experience and the emotions are from the person on the other side of this conversation, or the teams or the vendors or organizations that are on the other side. So giving real thought to it, authentic curiosity towards it. And then as a communicator, I need to think about, what do I need to do in this conversation and who do I need to be? Those are my 2 questions for myself. So what I might need to do is I might need to my key points across, make sure that the facts are known. I might need to push us towards a place of negotiation. I might need to make sure that we end with a conclusion that we can all live with and we know whose job it is to take actionable steps. Those are doing the steps. But then there are being steps as well. And being is the character you're going to bring to it, the spirit you need to bring to the conversation. Maybe I need to be bold. Maybe I need to be compassionate. Maybe I need to be curious. Maybe I need to be conciliatory. Maybe I need to play a symbolic role or a political role in this conversation. And having prepared yourself for, what do I need to do and what do I need to be? And then finally, what are my range of acceptable outcomes? It's never a good idea to go in with a clear, it must be this. What is the range of acceptable outcomes from this conversation? If you're giving tough feedback, it's always ideal if someone immediately says, I completely agree with you, and then they've got this lovely way they're going to rectify the situation. But that's one outcome, but the other outcome might be that I need to offer them time to think about it and we can talk more later this afternoon or next week. Or another outcome might be that they can go talk with some of their colleagues and see if others perceive the situation as I have. And so considering what those range of acceptable outcomes are as well, and knowing what will feel right at the end of the conversation for me. Engage emotions and experience, know what you need to do and who you need to be, and have a range of acceptable outcomes in mind.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think, and also talking about the fact that conflict is not a bad thing. We need to have it. We need to find out what's going on and be truthful. I'm a big believer in strategic thinking versus, and strategic planning is good, don't get me wrong, but strategic thinking, the difference is, to me, is that in strategic planning, you're looking for answers to questions. In strategic thinking, you're making sure you're asking yourself the right questions. Because if you don't do that, you're solving problems that may have no effect on what the true outcome is going to be. You're very good. Yeah. And I'll give you, my hat's off to you. Communication is very difficult. People don't understand sometimes how difficult it can be, how quickly people can take something from it that was never meant, or take something away that was never meant. So it's tough. It's a very tough. And leaders in organizations have to be great communicators. They have to really work on it.
Yeah.
And I may add, and I'm just going to ask you a reflection on this. How important is it for leaders to listen?
It is like, how important is it to breathe? That is my equivalent. If you are failing to listen as a leader, I don't think you'll sustain leadership for very long. It is absolutely vital. Your organization will learn to circumvent you if you fail to listen. And we don't, I wish that listening were taught in school alongside gym and physics, because I think there's one of those we're going to use every day, and it's the one that we don't have a class on. And I really wish active listening were taught as part of our vocabulary, because it is a skill set. It can be developed. It doesn't even take a lot of effort to develop it, but we so often have a lack of awareness about our own listening capacity. And that's where we really need is an honest audit of our own listening capacity, and then concerted effort to build it.
Can you imagine the power of teaching children, let's just say, ballpark here, between grades 5 and 8, put them in a listening class, how to actively listen, how to ask questions and actively listen. Wow. Incredible.
Absolutely.
That would just, and that would almost eliminate the problems of them eventually, as they grow older, becoming a leader. This is as second nature as it is to young people today, and their ability to manipulate their electronic devices and computers. That's second nature. Listening should become a second nature kind of a thing. That's a great thought.
Yep.
Really great. Well, we're getting close to the end here, and I'd like to ask you my, as I like to say, world famous question, because I've asked it from people all over the world. And that is simply this. If you had a magic wand and you could wave it at any issue or problem that you see or you work with, what might that be, and why did you choose that?
Yeah. I knew you asked this question, so I've been thinking about it. And the temptation is always to solve world hunger or reduce polarization or whatever it might be. But I want to go with one that's a little closer to home, which is that my magic wand would make things discussable, make the hard things discussable. Discussable with authentic curiosity rather than judgment, with an intent to learn, with true care for the individuals involved, to make our emotions discussable, our fears, beliefs, and our hopes discussable. Because I think it makes transparent what is truly needed, instead of exorcise a lot of the demons that we carry around when we can make things discussable. I think it makes transparent what is truly needed, and maybe this is the one that's most important to me. When the more people we have with which we can make our lives truly discussable, the deeper connection, not just communication, but I think, and maybe this is the one that's most important to me, when the more people we have with which we can make our lives truly discussable, the deeper connection, not just communication, but connection we have with people, the more known we felt, the more at home and belonging we feel in this world, and the more meaningful contribution we can make as a result. So make things discussable.
I agree. We should be able to talk to each other about anything openly. No judgments. We may end the day in agreeing to disagree.
Mm-hmm.
Fine. But we may come back from that, thinking about things that we hadn't thought about, maybe in the same way that we had thought about them. So I truly appreciate that. Amber, you've been great. I appreciate this very much. Appreciate your time and effort here on the Throttle Up Leadership Podcast. I want to wish you all the success and happiness in the future. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, John. So good to chat.